Sir, this is for first-class passengers only." Kenneth DeLong froze, boarding pass in hand, as the gate agent's words cut through the airport's ambient noise. Around him, the elite travelers of Atlantic Airways Flight 237 turned to stare. "Yes, I'm aware," he replied, voice steady despite the familiar sting. He'd built a pharmaceutical empire that saved millions of lives, yet still faced moments like this. Karen Falcon's eyes narrowed as she scrutinized his credentials, then his appearance, the absence of a tie, the comfortable sneakers he'd chosen for the 6-hour flight. Her gaze lingered a beat too long on his skin. "May I see some ID?" Kenneth noticed the white executive ahead of him had boarded with just a casual glance at his boarding pass. The businessman behind him shifted uncomfortably, averting his eyes from the unfolding scene. "Is there a problem?" Kenneth asked, sliding his license across the counter. "There seems to be an issue with your boarding privileges," Karen announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You'll need to wait aside while I verify this." A flight attendant, Robin, glanced over with visible discomfort as Kenneth was directed away from the line. She'd seen this before. Kenneth reached for his phone, fingers hovering over his attorney's number. In 20 minutes, he was supposed to be settling into Seat 2A, reviewing notes for tomorrow's congressional testimony. Instead, he stood isolated at the gate, watching others board without question. He made the call. What happened next would send shockwaves through an entire airline, expose the invisible barriers that persist despite success, and force a reckoning that no one at Gate 27 could have anticipated. Have you ever witnessed someone being judged by their appearance rather than their credentials? What would you have done in Kenneth's position? Share your thoughts in the comments below and join me as we uncover how one phone call from a wronged black CEO brought an entire airline to its knees. Before Kenneth DeLong became the CEO who shut down an airline with a single call, he was a biochemistry prodigy from Memphis with a vision. The son of a postal worker and a nurse, Kenneth had transformed a breakthrough medication delivery system into Heritage Pharmaceuticals, now valued at $4.2 billion. His company's mission, making life-saving medications accessible to underserved communities. Despite his Forbes listing, Kenneth maintained his grandfather's philosophy. Your worth isn't in your wallet, but in your impact. His grandfather had marched with Dr. King and taught Kenneth that dignity was non-negotiable, especially when facing discrimination. "You don't have to raise your voice to be heard," his grandfather would say, "but you must never accept being silenced." At 58, Kenneth had perfected the art of commanding respect without demanding it. His tailored suits were his armor in boardrooms. But today's cross-country flight called for subtle comfort. Italian loafers exchanged for premium sneakers, tie tucked into his briefcase. Karen Falcon hadn't always been the gatekeeper she'd become. 15 years at Atlantic Airways had hardened her. 3 times passed over for promotion, she'd developed a rigid adherence to procedure, selectively applied. Her supervisor had recently warned her about customer experience issues, code, for complaints about her treatment of certain passengers. "I'm just doing my job," she'd insist, never acknowledging the patterns in her scrutiny. Robin Valera observed the confrontation from the jet bridge entrance, stomach knotting with familiar tension. As a first-generation Filipino-American flight attendant, she'd witnessed countless microaggressions, some directed at passengers, others at herself. Atlantic Airways diversity training consisted of a 20-minute video that everyone clicked through while multitasking. Robin's mother had taught her to keep her head down, to survive rather than challenge. "Your job feeds your daughter," she'd remind Robin. But watching Kenneth being singled out stirred something deeper than her fear of confrontation. Meanwhile, across town in Atlantic's corporate headquarters, Kim Taylor was reviewing quarterly reports. The VP of Operations had climbed the corporate ladder by being practical rather than principled. Half-black but rarely acknowledging it, Kim had learned to navigate white corporate spaces by becoming invisible, until she became powerful. And Clinton Beard, Kenneth's attorney since their Howard University days, was reviewing case notes when his phone lit up with Kenneth's name. Clinton had just beaten cancer and promised himself he'd only fight battles that mattered. He had no idea this call would become one of the most consequential of his 4-decade career. 5 lives about to collide in ways none could predict. All because one gate agent couldn't imagine that the black man in comfortable shoes belonged in first class. "System flagging," Karen explained vaguely, her fingers tapping performatively on her keyboard. "Security protocols?" Kenneth maintained his composure, aware of the growing audience. "I've flown first class with Atlantic over 30 times this year alone. There's never been an issue before." "Well, there's one today," Karen replied, voice rising slightly. "Perhaps you were upgraded previously by mistake." A white couple approached the counter, first-class tickets in hand. Karen immediately brightened. "Good afternoon. Boarding now, just scan right through." Kenneth noticed Robin's expression shift from discomfort to something harder. She stepped forward. "Aaron, I can verify Mr. DeLong is correctly booked in first class. He's a frequent flyer with us." Karen's smile vanished. "Robin, I'm handling this. Return to the aircraft." "But I recognize you." "That's enough," Karen snapped. "I'm following procedure." Kenneth checked his watch. The flight would begin boarding economy passengers soon. His congressional testimony on medication pricing reform couldn't be rescheduled. Thousands of patients were counting on his advocacy. "May I speak with your supervisor?" he asked quietly. "He's unavailable," Karen replied too quickly. "And we're boarding a full flight. You can wait over there while I sort this out, or I can rebook you on tomorrow's flight." A businessman in line behind Kenneth cleared his throat. "Excuse me, but this seems unnecessary. The gentleman clearly has a first-class ticket." Karen's face flushed. "Sir, for security reasons, I cannot discuss another passenger's situation." "Yet you're discussing it loudly enough for everyone to hear," the man countered. Kenneth raised a hand slightly. "It's all right. I appreciate your concern." He stepped aside, dignity intact, and made his call. "Clinton?" "Kenneth, I'm at Atlanta International, Gate 27. Atlantic Airways is refusing to board me in first class despite my ticket." "Yes, again, but this time I think we need to respond differently." Clinton's voice hardened. "Details. Now." As Kenneth quietly explained, Karen announced final boarding for first class. Robin approached him again, this time with a bottle of water. "I'm so sorry, Mr. DeLong," she whispered. "This isn't right." "Thank you, Robin," he replied, noting her name tag. "Sometimes standing witness is its own form of courage." Across town, Clinton's office erupted into action. 3 associates began making calls to the Department of Transportation, to civil rights attorneys, to journalists who owed Clinton favors. Another drafted an emergency injunction. Clinton himself called Kim Taylor directly, bypassing 3 layers of corporate gatekeepers. "Miss Taylor?" Clinton Beard, representing Kenneth DeLong. "Yes, the Kenneth DeLong. Your gate agent at Atlanta International is currently discriminating against my client in full view of dozens of witnesses. I'm calling as a professional courtesy before this becomes a national incident." Back at the gate, Kenneth watched as the final first-class passengers boarded, including a young white man in sweatpants and a hoodie who breezed past Karen without additional ID verification. "Mr. DeLong?" Karen called, her tone suddenly professional. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding. You're cleared to board now." Canoni didn't move. "What changed in the last 10 minutes, Ms. Falcon?" Her eyes widened at his use of her name. "The system cleared your ticket." "The system," Kenneth repeated softly. "Or did someone call you?" Before she could answer, her phone rang. The color drained from her face as she listened. "Yes, Miss Taylor. He's still here." "Yes, I understand." Immediately, Kenneth's phone buzzed with a text from Clinton. "Don't board. Wait." The first domino had fallen. What happened next would change Atlantic Airways forever. Clinton Beard's office transformed into a war room within minutes. 3 decades of practicing law had given him an extensive network, and Kenneth's situation activated all of it. "Get me Eliza Washington at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution," he instructed his assistant, while simultaneously texting a federal judge who owed him a favor. "And find out which civil rights organizations have active cases against Atlantic Airways." The answer came quickly. 4 pending discrimination lawsuits, all quietly settled before reaching court. "Not this time," Clinton muttered, cancer survivor's resolve hardening his voice. Meanwhile, Kenneth stood calmly at Gate 27 as activity swirled around him. His phone vibrated continuously with updates from Clinton. The departure time came and went. The aircraft door remained open. Karen's demeanor had shifted dramatically. Her supervisor had appeared, summoned by an urgent call from corporate, and was reviewing security footage of the incident on a tablet. "Mr. DeLong," the supervisor said, approaching with visible anxiety. "I'm Thomas Reeves, Customer Service Manager. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. We'd like to escort you aboard immediately." Kenneth smiled politely. "I appreciate that, Mr. Reeves, but I believe I'll wait for Ms. Taylor. I understand she's on her way." Thomas blanched. "The VP of Operations is coming here, personally?" "So I'm told," Kenneth replied. In the executive parking garage downtown, Kim Taylor slammed her car door, phone pressed to her ear. "What do you mean the flight can't depart? We have connection schedules to maintain." The operations manager's voice crackled through her speaker. "The pilot refuses to close the door without resolution, says it's a matter of principle." "Principals don't pay for jet fuel," Kim snapped. But her mind was racing. Clinton Beard's call had been alarmingly specific, not just about Kenneth's treatment, but about Atlantic's pattern of discrimination. How did he know about the Memphis incident? She wondered aloud. That case had been sealed by court order. At the gate, Robin Valera made a decision. Stepping away from her colleagues, she approached Kenneth. "Mr. DeLong, I want to formally apologize for how you've been treated. This isn't the first time I've seen this happen, but I've never spoken up before." Kenneth studied her. "Why now?" "Because I'm tired of being complicit," she said, voice trembling slightly. "And because my daughter deserves a better example." As they spoke, Kenneth's phone lit up with notifications. Atlantic Airways racism was trending on Twitter. A passenger had recorded the entire incident and posted it online with the caption, "Watch how this black man in first class gets treated versus everyone else." The video had 50,000 views already. In the terminal, other Atlantic flights began experiencing mysterious delays. Pilots calling in sick, crew members forgetting paperwork. The domino effect of Clinton's calls rippled through the airline's operations. Kim Taylor arrived at the gate 40 minutes after the scheduled departure, face composed but eyes revealing her panic. She'd received 3 calls en route, from Atlantic's CEO, their largest shareholder, and their chief legal counsel. "Mr. DeLong," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Kim Taylor, VP of Operations. I understand there's been an incident." Kenneth shook her hand firmly. "Not an incident, Miss Taylor. A pattern." Kim's carefully constructed professional facade cracked slightly. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere private." "I think here is appropriate," Kenneth replied. "After all, my humiliation wasn't private." Behind them, passengers from other delayed flights began gathering, many recording with their phones. Atlantic's carefully cultivated image was unraveling in real time, and the airline that had denied Kenneth DeLong his seat was about to learn the true cost of discrimination. The departure board throughout Atlanta International began to flicker with delays. First flight 237, then 3 more Atlantic Airways routes. Within 30 minutes, every Atlantic flight on the board showed red. System-wide technical difficulties, the announcements claimed. But airport staff exchanged knowing glances. Word had spread through employee channels. Something big was happening at Gate 27. Kim Taylor's professional smile had long vanished as she faced Kenneth DeLong in front of a growing crowd. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from executives demanding updates. "Mr. DeLong, "I assure you this isolated incident doesn't reflect Atlantic's values," she said, voice pitched for the recording phones around them. "And isolated?" Kenneth raised an eyebrow. "Ms. Taylor, in the past hour, my attorney has collected statements from 17 Atlantic passengers who experienced similar treatment. All black, all first class, all randomly selected for additional verification." Kim's composure slipped further. "We have protocols, selectively enforced protocols," Kenneth interrupted gently. "And we both know it." Behind Kim, Karen Falcon stood rigid, her supervisor whispering urgently in her ear. Robin had positioned herself beside Kenneth, her decision made. "It wasn't just Mr. DeLong," Robin said suddenly, her voice carrying across the gate area. "I've witnessed this pattern for years. We even have unofficial terms for it. First-class verification is code for questioning passengers who don't fit the expected profile." Kim turned sharply. "Flight attendant, you're speaking outside your authority." "I'm speaking my truth," Robin replied, hands trembling but voice steady. "And I'm not alone." As if on cue, 2 other Atlantic crew members stepped forward from the gathered crowd. "She's right," said one, a veteran flight attendant. "We've been told to use our judgment about who belongs in premium cabins." The second, a gate agent from another terminal, nodded. "I was instructed to check ID more carefully for certain passengers during training." Kim's phone rang again, Atlantic's CEO himself. She answered, stepping aside, but still within earshot. "Kim, what the hell is happening? We've got CNBC calling for comment, and our stock just dropped 3 points in 20 minutes. Kenneth checked his own phone. Clinton had texted, "DOT launching immediate investigation. Press conference in 30, your call." The crowd at Gate 27 had swelled to over 100 people. Passengers from delayed flights, airport staff, even pilots from other airlines. Many were live streaming. A journalist, who happened to be traveling through, recognized Kenneth from a recent Forbes cover. "Mr. DeLong, Jessica Chen from Bloomberg. Care to comment on what's happening with Atlantic Airways today?" Kenneth considered the moment carefully. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. "What's happening today," he said clearly, "is that an airline is facing the consequences of systemic discrimination that has gone unchallenged for too long. This isn't about me being denied a seat I paid for. It's about every person who's been made to feel they don't belong in spaces they've earned the right to occupy." The journalist's eyes widened as she recognized the story's magnitude. "And the airline-wide delays?" Kenneth smiled slightly. "I believe Atlantic is experiencing an unexpected moment of reflection." Kim returned, face ashen. "Mr. DeLong, our CEO would like to speak with you directly." "I'm sure he would," Kenneth replied. "But first I'd like to hear from Ms. Falcon." All eyes turned to Karen, who looked trapped between defiance and fear. "I was following procedure," she insisted, but her voice wavered. "Were you?" Kenneth asked. "Or were you following assumptions? When you saw me, what did you see first? My ticket or my skin?" The question hung in the air, uncomfortable and necessary. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then looked down. "I didn't think you belonged there," she finally admitted, the truth breaking through years of denial. "And I never questioned why I thought that." The simple admission shifted the atmosphere. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about the countless invisible barriers that remained, even for someone like Kenneth DeLong. "What would you do if you witnessed discrimination like this?" Kenneth asked, addressing the cameras directly. "Would you speak up or stay silent? Because in the end, systems don't change themselves. People change them. One difficult conversation at a time." As Kenneth spoke, Clinton texted again. "Atlantic CEO offering emergency board meeting, policy overhaul, and public apology. Your terms?" The airline that had tried to deny Kenneth DeLong his seat was now at his mercy, and his next decision would determine the fate of thousands of employees, countless future passengers, and an entire corporate culture built on unexamined bias. "Before we discuss terms," Kenneth said to Kim Taylor, I'd like to know why you, of all people, allowed this culture to persist." The question caught her off guard. Few people acknowledged her mixed heritage, a fact she'd carefully managed throughout her career. "I don't know what you mean," she replied stiffly. "I think you do," Kenneth said quietly. "You've navigated these waters your whole life, just as I have." Something cracked in Kim's carefully constructed facade. "You don't understand the compromises required to reach this position." "I understand them perfectly," Kenneth countered. "I've just refused to make them." Their exchange was interrupted by the arrival of Atlantic's chief legal counsel, breathless from running through the terminal. "Mr. DeLong, I'm James Whitaker. We need to resolve this immediately." Kenneth smiled. "Interesting. When I was simply a passenger being humiliated, there was no urgency. Now that your stock is falling and social media is ablaze, suddenly there's a crisis." Whitaker blanched. Atlantic Airways racism was mentioned 87,000 times in the last hour. We're hemorrhaging bookings for next quarter. "The cost of discrimination is becoming quite tangible, isn't it?" Kenneth observed. Meanwhile, Karen Falcon stood apart, watching her career implode. Robin approached her cautiously. "I tried to warn you," Robin said. "You don't understand," Karen replied bitterly. "Do you know how many rules passengers break daily, but only certain ones get reported?" "That's exactly the problem," Robin said. "You enforced rules selectively based on who you thought deserved scrutiny." Karen's defenses finally collapsed. "I never thought of myself as racist." "Few people do," Robin replied. "That's why it persists." Across the terminal, Clinton Beard arrived with a team of attorneys and civil rights advocates. The crowd parted for them like a sea. "Kenneth," Clinton called, embracing his friend. "The Department of Transportation is launching a formal investigation into Atlantic's boarding practices. They're requesting passenger data from the last 5 years. Whitaker paled further. "That's proprietary information." "Not anymore," Clinton replied. "Discrimination isn't protected by privacy laws." Kenneth surveyed the scene. Delayed passengers, anxious executives, media recording every word. This moment could be weaponized for personal vengeance or leveraged for lasting change. "Here are my terms," he announced, addressing Whitaker and Kim. "First, Atlantic Airways will commission an independent audit of its customer service practices, with results made public." Whitaker started to object, but Kim silenced him with a look. "Second, you'll implement comprehensive anti-bias training. Not 20-minute videos, but meaningful education with measurable outcomes." Kampf continued. "Third, establish a passenger advocacy board with diverse representation and real authority to recommend policy changes." He paused, then added, "Finally, no retaliation against employees who've spoken up today. People like Robin deserve promotion, not punishment for their integrity." Kim studied Kenneth. "And if we agree, then I don't pursue legal action, and I help rebuild public trust in Atlantic's commitment to change." The executives exchanged glances, calculating costs versus benefits. "There's one more thing," Kenneth said. "Karen Falcon needs consequences, but also education, not simply termination." Karen looked up, shocked. "Firing her changes nothing about your corporate culture," Kenneth explained. "Transforming her understanding might actually create an advocate." Clinton raised an eyebrow at his friend's mercy, but nodded in agreement. Kim Taylor straightened her shoulders, making a decision that would define her career. "We accept your terms, Mr. DeLong, and I'll personally oversee their implementation." "How would you do that?" Whitaker demanded. Kim's professional mask finally fell completely. "Because he's right. I've been complicit in a system I knew was wrong, because challenging it seemed too costly. That calculation changes today." As the executives huddled to draft an immediate press release, Kenneth turned to the gathered crowd and cameras. "Today wasn't about a seat on an airplane," he said. "It was about who gets questioned when they occupy spaces they've earned the right to be in. It was about the exhaustion of constantly proving you belong." He gestured toward Robin and the other employees who had spoken up. "Change happens because brave individuals risk their comfort for what's right. Remember their courage when you witness injustice and wonder if your voice matters. The Atlantic Airways crisis would make headlines for weeks, but its most profound impact wouldn't be measured in stock prices or policy documents. It would be measured in the subtle shift of thousands of daily interactions in airports, boardrooms, and beyond, where the question, "Do you belong here?" would be asked less often of those who had always belonged, but were rarely welcome. 3 months after the incident at Gate 27, Kenneth DeLong returned to Atlanta International. The terminal looked the same, but subtle changes were evident to the observant eye. New signage displayed Atlantic Airways' updated passenger rights policy. Gate agents wore pins reading, "Everyone belongs." Most notably, Karen Falcon stood at a different counter, now working alongside a diversity trainer observing employee-passenger interactions. She noticed Kenneth immediately, her posture stiffening. He approached deliberately. "Morning, Miss Falcon." "Mr. DeLong," she replied, voice carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you flying Atlantic again." "Change requires engagement, not abandonment," he said. "How's the new position?" Karen hesitated. "Humbling. I'm learning things about myself I didn't want to face. That's where growth begins," Kenneth observed. Their conversation was interrupted by Robin Valera, now wearing a supervisor's blazer. "Mr. DeLong, your upgrade to first class has been processed," she said with a smile, "and the CEO asked me to personally escort you to the Atlantic Executive Lounge before boarding." Kenneth raised an eyebrow. "Quite the change in protocol." "Poll of many," Robin replied. "The Passenger Advocacy Board you established has implemented 17 policy revisions. Complaints of discriminatory treatment are down 60%. As they walked through the terminal, Robin continued, "The most significant change isn't in the policies, though. It's in the conversations happening in break rooms and training sessions. People are actually talking about bias now instead of pretending it doesn't exist." In the executive lounge, Kim Taylor waited, transformed from the defensive executive Kenneth had confronted months earlier. She'd become the unexpected champion of Atlantic's cultural overhaul, leveraging her position and personal experience to drive authentic change. "Our stock took a 15% hit after your incident," she admitted, showing Kenneth the recovery charts. "But we're almost back to previous levels, and customer satisfaction scores among minority passengers have increased dramatically." "Numbers matter," Kenneth acknowledged, "but individual experiences matter more. What happens when cameras aren't recording and hashtags aren't trending?" Kim nodded. "That's the harder work. We've terminated 8 employees for continued discriminatory behavior, but more importantly, we promoted 23 who demonstrated exceptional commitment to inclusive service." She hesitated, then added, "I owe you an apology, Kenneth. Not just for what happened that day, but for years of looking the other way. I convinced myself that reaching this position would eventually allow me to make changes, but instead I became part of the system I claimed to oppose." "The system is designed to co-opt us," Kenneth replied. "Breaking free requires conscious choice." Daily. As boarding time approached, Clinton joined them, bringing news of the Department of Transportation's findings. The investigation had expanded to include 5 other major airlines, all showing similar patterns of first-class verification discrepancies based on race. "Your single phone call triggered an industry-wide reckoning," Clinton told his friend. "Sometimes the most powerful act of resistance is simply refusing to accept mistreatment." Kenneth's congressional testimony on medication pricing had been rescheduled and ultimately successful, securing affordable access for millions. But this unexpected chapter had perhaps created even broader impact. As they boarded the aircraft, Kenneth walking through first class without challenge, he reflected on his grandfather's words about dignity being non-negotiable. The lesson had come full circle. The flight attendant welcoming passengers was a young black woman who made eye contact with every first-class passenger, regardless of appearance. Small changes, significant meaning. Kenneth settled into his seat, opening his laptop to review Heritage Pharmaceuticals' latest accessibility initiative. A notification appeared. Atlantic Airways had made a substantial donation to his foundation, supporting minority students in biochemistry. Transformation rarely happens through single dramatic moments. More often, it occurs through the accumulated weight of individual choices. The decision to speak up rather than remain silent, to acknowledge uncomfortable truths rather than perpetuate comfortable fictions, to demand accountability rather than accept the status quo. Kenneth DeLong hadn't set out to change an airline that day at Gate 27. He had simply refused to accept being treated as less than he was. That refusal, multiplied across countless similar moments of quiet dignity and resolute determination, is how progress actually happens. The true power in this story isn't that a billionaire CEO shut down an airline with one phone call. It's that his response to injustice created space for others to recognize and challenge the biases that shape our daily interactions. This story reminds us that change happens when we refuse to accept injustice. Subscribe to Timeless Memoir for more powerful stories that challenge how we see the world and inspire us to create the change we wish to see.